Um, that leads me to probably the next largest question that everyone faces, everyone in your position faces, which is what to do about a disease that is important in terms of public health and increasing in incidence. The conventional wisdom, as imparted by Western countries, is that your soundest intervention would be early diagnosis and treatment. That, I think, runs up against a problem which we find in the literature repeatedly, which suggests that 30 to 40% of breast cancer is preventable. And yet so little money is being spent across the board trying to develop risk reduction strategies. So it would seem to be quite important and clever to figure out ahead of the curve how breast cancer could be prevented and to get your arms around that in an important way. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think for sure we can't keep, even with early diagnosis, it means people are living with a condition and the cost of management cannot be sustained. So wherever we have an opportunity to prevent, for sure some of the lifestyle things are across the board applicable. It's applicable to diabetes, hypertension, heart diseases, and so proper diet, alcohol, excessive alcohol use, the physical activity, and so are things that we have to encourage, and hopefully that will have an impact. But in addition to that, we need to start wherever possible to identify causative factors and agents so that we can do what we're doing with the vaccine preventable diseases, for example.
Right.
We no longer have measles, we no longer have polio. There are at least 14 diseases in our country that used to be reasons for children dying, children becoming permanently disabled, and so on, that are no longer applicable to our country. We do now know that we have an opportunity to prevent cervical cancer through the use of HPV vaccine. We do also know that by early diagnosis we can do something about cervical cancer. So what makes us think that the same isn't applicable to breast cancer? I believe that countries like Guyana must not simply wait for things to be done in developed countries. I believe that we should be at the cutting edge of research, knowledge, and technology so that our people don't have to benefit from some of these things later, you know, 20, 30, 40 years later.
Right.
We can be at the cutting edge of these things.
Yes.
Fortunately, we are not so far behind with the use of HPV vaccine and the early diagnosis of cervical cancer, and it's making a huge difference in our country. Well, I believe we can do the same for breast cancer. Clearly, the research is demonstrating that there might be links with viruses similar to what we have found with cervical cancer. We mustn't forget that it wasn't so long ago. Even when I had become a researcher in the SUNY system in New York, ulcer was a incurable disease. Today, it is a manageable disease and a curable disease because we have linked H. pylori with ulcers.
Right.
We now know it with cervical cancer. And we mustn't forget, it wasn't so long ago, in 1981 and 1982, that HIV, when we didn't know what caused it, was just simply a killer disease. And today we know it's caused by a virus and can be controlled. So I believe that those researchers that are presently linking viruses to breast cancer is something that developing countries like Guyana must pay attention to. We do have a cohort of people living with breast cancer. Do they have some of these viruses? We need to find out. We need to find out if other family members are exposed to these viruses and maybe start taking some action. That through education and awareness and other intervention might reduce risk for other people. Wherever an opportunity exists for prevention, countries like Guyana, and indeed any country, should aggressively pursue these actions. It's not only it is not only something that scientifically is desirable, it is morally the correct thing to do. I think that we let people down, and I think that not just letting people down, but morally, it's reprehensible to know that there might be prevention things that don't take much money. And we do have professionals who are using various forms of this technology already in developing countries. So why don't we do it? We wait too long for these things to happen. HPV was known to be around since the early 80s. We waited till a new millennium. And now we see the possibility not only of preventing cervical cancer, but of eliminating it. Breast cancer shouldn't be too far behind.
I'm interested to know what your view as a Minister of Health and as a global healthcare leader, how you would see the face of breast cancer changing if we were able to show a relationship between the mouse mammary tumor virus, or as some refer to it, the human mammary tumor virus, and breast cancer. So how would you see breast cancer changing around the world if we were able to create that irrefutable relationship?
You know, I believe that if that relationship, if that link can be made, it would absolutely change how we approach breast cancer. We approach it with a sense of inevitability right now. We think that certain people cannot avoid having breast cancer simply because we think that if one member of a family have breast cancer, that it's inevitable that everybody else would have it. I think knowing your enemy, and I'm looking at it as knowing your enemy here, makes a vast difference in how we fight. Linking MTV or the human mammary tumor virus to the pathogenesis of breast cancer would suddenly open up a new horizon for us. That in fact, not only can we control breast cancer, not only can we prevent deaths from breast cancer, but that we can eliminate it. It opens up the possibility of identifying young women long before they are diagnosed with breast cancer, of being in a risk group, and therefore managing them better, and so that even if they are on this path of having breast cancer sometime in their life, by knowing that you are at risk, we can manage you, and therefore, whenever it develops, being able to identify you early. But it also allows us to develop vaccines and treat young women with these vaccines so that indeed it becomes preventable. So that the possibilities are endless. In fact, it moves breast cancer from an inevitability to something that could join all those vaccine preventable diseases as diseases that are no longer present in the world.